Hello, everybody. Welcome to this C3S webinar. My name is Alberto Troccoli, and I am chairing this webinar. Welcome to everybody. Maybe there's also some of you who attended the first one. So this is the second webinar in the series of the Copernicus Climate Change Service Energy Webinars. And it's a pleasure to welcome to this second webinar. So I lead, my name is Alberto Troccoli, and I lead this C3S Energy Service. And I am from the Inside Climate Service and also the World Energy and Meteorology Council. So just a brief overview to start with, just to give you an idea what C3S Energy is about, but then there's also other speakers who will touch on that. The next speaker, who I'll introduce soon. I just want to give you a very high-level view of what C3S Energy is and what it provides. And it's basically divided into climate indicators and energy indicators. So standard climate indicators are temperature, precipitation, solar radiation, and wind speed, but we're also producing others, like relative humidity now. So watch this space. In terms of energy indicators, we have a few. We have the PV, solar power generation, wind power generation, both onshore and offshore, electricity demand, and hydropower generation, both run-of-river and reservoir. The new thing about this new service, this is a phase 2. The first phase is similar, but focused on Europe only. With this service, we are going global, and we are working hard to produce the data that will become available later in the year. And the service is divided in 3 streams. So we call the first stream historical, so looking back based on the reconstruction of the climate reanalysis from 1950 to present. Then we have a second stream, seasonal forecast, and covers also the hindcast, of course, and then the projections that go out to 2100. Okay, that's it for the overview. You will hear more about some of these aspects, and today we start to focus on the energy aspects, unlike last time where we focused on the climate side. So this is the agenda more specifically. We'll go back in a minute. I just want to give you also some information about the webinar, some housekeeping. So your audio and video are deactivated by default, as you will have seen. You are welcome to submit your questions in the Q&A section, and we will address them verbally after the presentations. And some questions may be also answered in writing during the webinar. And the questions can be submitted at any time during the presentations, at the end, well, as soon as possible at the end of the talk, so we can take a look at them and address them appropriately. And the webinar is being recorded and will be available online as soon as possible after the webinar. So I'll go back to the slides with the agenda. So today we have the two main presentations are around the energy indicators I mentioned. So the 2 indicators we are addressing today is wind power and PV solar power. Before we get into that, we have an introduction to the C3S operational service for the energy sector by Nube Gonzalez Reviriego. And Nube is the Energy and Agriculture Technical Officer of the Copernicus Climate Change Service at the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, ECNWF. She holds a PhD in climate and has extensive experience in co-developing and implementing climate services for different sectors, including renewable energy, agriculture, health, with both private and public institutions. She has participated as a climate service scientist in many national and European projects and is currently involved in the operational delivery of C3S services to the energy sector. So before I hand over to Nube, who I also want to thank for the support in this contract or project, I also want to let you know that Nube unfortunately won't be able to be here for the Q&A, but please submit questions anyway, because we will address them and then provide them in some form. If you want to provide also your email address, then we should have it anyway. So we'll respond anyway, even if Nube won't be around for the Q&A. And also, I would like to thank the organizers of the webinar, particularly Elena Restivo, who's behind the scenes working hard. Thank you, Elena. And with that, I'll hand over to Nube.
Thank you, Alberto.
I'll stop sharing. And Nube, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto, for the presentation. I would like to welcome all of you to this Copernicus Climate Change Service series of webinar. Today, I would like to briefly introduce Copernicus Climate Change for those who don't know about it. And then I will like to introduce just a general view of the activities that we are doing within the operational services for the energy sector. So what is Copernicus? So Copernicus is the Earth observation component of the European Union Space Program. And the main aim of this Copernicus is to develop European services based on both satellite Earth observation and in situ data set. In Copernicus, there are already 6 services in place, and one of them is the Copernicus Climate Change Service, which is implemented by the European Center for Medium Weather Forecast, ECMWF. If just a little bit more about the Copernicus Climate Change Service, just in a nutshell, the Copernicus Climate Change Service main mission is to support society, providing authoritative information about the past, present, and future climate in Europe, but also for the rest of the world. If I would like to, if I have to highlight some aspect of the service, I will say that we provide reliable and open and free of charge climate data set. All the information that we provide at C3S is fully traceable. This means that we provide documentation, the workflow, and the code behind all the information. But also we are working in sectorial application. And I will explain you more what we are doing for the energy sector in particular later. But also we would like to showcase how different sectors use the C3S data within a real application. And then finally, my final remark will be that all the information that we are providing in the Copernicus Climate Change Service is quality assurance. And yeah, we have this independent quality checks. And if we move, so if you would like to have more information regarding the C3S activities, but also to know more about the Energy Hub or the European State of the Climate, I will recommend you to watch the first webinar that is you can find in this link here. So as Alberto has explained before, at the Copernicus Climate Change Service, we are developing an operational service for the energy sector. We started this operational service some years ago. And what you can see here is the first phase, in which we provide through the climate data store 2 main data sets: climate and energy indicator for Europe for the historical period, and also the same indicator for the future period just derived from climate change projection using Eurocortes simulation. Right now, what we are doing is to enhance this operational service, and this is the work that we are doing currently together with ICS, Armeens, Everos, Enel, and EDF on behalf of the C3S. So basically, in this new version of the operational energy service, we are providing both climate and energy indicators. And then this is something that we were providing before for the European region, but now we are expanding it globally. We are also improving the conversion models to pass from climate variable to energies. Of course, my colleague will explain you more about this modeling approach later. And basically, we are targeting to 4 different technologies: the PV, the wind, the wind and the hydropower, but also we are providing information for electricity demand. So in this operational service, we aim to deliver information for the historical period from 1950 to present day. Then we would like to provide also information for the seasonal forecast, which means information retrospectively for the last years, but also information for the future 6 months. And then also we have climate change projection, so from present to 2100. If we go more in details regarding what climate indicator we are providing in this service, we are providing temperature, precipitation, wind speed at both 10 meter and 100 meter, also solar radiation at surface, and mean sea level pressure. The resolution, the temporal resolution for these climate indicators, it depends on the temporal stream. For historical and projection will be hourly, whereas for seasonal will be daily. And then regarding the spatial resolution, we have either gridded information at 0.25 degrees in the case of both historical and projection, but also we will provide spatial aggregation data by country and sub-country level. And in the case of the seasonal stream, the gridded data will have a resolution of 1 degree, and then we will provide aggregation at a country level. Regarding the energy indicators, we are providing electricity demand, but also capacity factor for wind power, both onshore and offshore, capacity factor for solar power, and hydropower, both run of river and reservoir. In this case, we are providing different temporal resolution. For the capacity factor of wind, solar, and hydro, it will be hourly and daily, depending on the technology. You can see the table here, and also again we are providing both gridded data and country and sub-country aggregation. Just if a little bit here, you can see the general workflow behind the service. Basically, we started by using the data from the different sources. In the case of historical, era 5. In the seasonal, we are using 3 seasonal prediction systems. And in the case of the projection, we are using 4 CMIXIS model and 2 medium emission scenarios. Then after that, there is a reprocessing of this data in terms of spatial and temporal aggregation. Then we bias adjust those data that need to have some bias adjustment. In particular, we apply for seasonal data and for the climate change projection. Then we need to convert the 10-meter wind speed to 100-meter wind speed. And then we obtain the climate indicators in the NetCDF format. This is the gridded indicators that we are providing in the service. But then on top of those, we can make some spatial aggregator and provide these climate indicators, this time in CSV format, just aggregated to country or sub-country level. And then from these gridded climate indicators, we just mix with energy dataset, and we apply the different energy conversion model to obtain the gridded energy indicators. Again, the gridded indicators are in NetCDF format, but then we just aggregate and also apply some exclusion layer when needed. And then we obtain this time in CSV format the aggregated energy indicators. More details about the energy modeling and all the steps will be provided by the next speaker. And where to find this energy dataset? So our idea is to provide this dataset in the Copernicus Climate Data Store. This dataset will be open data, free of charge, fully documented, and of course, quality assured. You will find it here in this link, and I think the timeline for having ready will be maybe sometimes by the end of this year. And I think this is all from my side. I hope that you enjoyed the webinar. If you have questions, please write in the question and answer, and I will try to reply before my leave. So enjoy the webinar, and thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nube. That was a very nice and easy to follow presentation to provide the background for the C3S Energy and also the Copernicus more broadly. And like Nube said, please put your questions on the chat. So we are then moving to the next speaker. Before I do that, I also want to acknowledge, before I forget again, our partners in the project. So the project is coordinated by Inside Climate Service, and partners are Armin, EDF, Everose, and NL. And of course, with strong support from ECNWF, C3S. And with that, I would like to move then to the next presentation, which is about the wind power energy indicator. So this will be presented by Stefano Campostrini at Inside Climate Service. And Stefano is the data engineer and has a Bachelor of Science in Physics and a Master's in Environmental Meteorology, and experience in deep learning models and in the creation of climate data pipelines. Currently in the C3S Energy Services, he's involved in the production of climate data, historical seasonal forecasts and projections, as well as the development of various software tools for their analysis. So over to you.
Hi,
Stefano.
Alberto. Thank you very much for the introduction. I think we'll also launch the occasion to launch the poll.
Correct. Yes. Thanks for reminding me. So we are launching a poll before we do that. So thanks. So in the agenda, you'll have seen the poll. We've done the presentation of Stefano, so that's we then skip that later. But I forgot to request the poll, and we now have on your screen some questions. We have 5 questions, simple questions, which should be easy to address, but I'll read them out to you, and please fill them out at your own time I just read them also for the recording. So the first question is, which of the following energy indicators are you mostly interested in? And you can select any of the following: wind power, solar PV power, hydropower, electricity demand. A reminder that today we cover wind and solar, and I will mention later there'll be another webinar in just a week from now, which will cover the other two indicators currently available, hydro and electricity demand. So on the 10th of July, at the same time, we'll have the other webinar on these other two indicators. Question number 2, which spatial scales are you mostly interested in for the energy indicators? Again, you can select all you think are applicable: individual power plants, regional, namely district averaged or country averaged, gridded data, or I'm not sure. So this is just to have an idea of your main interest. It doesn't necessarily imply that they would be provided, particularly individual power plants. This is a bit too fine scale for the current work we're doing, particularly because, like I said, we're working on global data sets. So, but we want to collect information from you on your general interests and to see also what we can do in future developments of the C3S Energy. Question number 3, which temporal resolution are most relevant for your work in terms of energy indicators? Again, you can select any amongst the following: hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, annually. Okay, number 4, which turbine hub height are most relevant for wind power energy indicators in your experience? Please select all applicable. So we have 100 meter, 150, 200 meter, 250, and I'm not sure. Number 5, which types of PV installations are most relevant for the solar PV power indicators in your experience? Please select all applicable. Residential, industrial, utility scale, I'm not sure. Number 6, there's actually a 6th one, which is an open question. This may take a little bit more time. We'll give you 2 minutes. Are there other energy indicators you are interested in that were not listed above? That is. And if so, please give a brief description about what they are. Again, this is something that we'll collect, and it's not the first time, but we are collecting as much information as possible from users of the service or potential users, so we can then tailor the service better to your requirements. So I'm just checking whether we have enough responses now. We are at about just over 50%. If we can have a few more, I guess you need to submit your questions once you've done it, so we know that you have submitted. It's going up a little bit. We are waiting another minute or 2. We'd like to have a few more if we can. I know you can't communicate directly. If you need a little more time, let us know on the chat. Great Q&A. Let's see. So let's see, the numbers are going up. Yeah, we are over half. I think roughly 60%. I think if we wait another minute, then we get to 70%, and then we can close. And then we're done with polls for today and just presentations. And I think, yeah, we are on time. So I'll count down 10, and then we close the poll, yes? So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's close the poll. And over to you now, Stefano. And you can actually read, everybody, you can see the responses on your screen. Excellent, thank you very much, Elena. And now over to you, Stefano.
Thank you, Albert. So I will now share my screen. I hope you can all see my screen, I think so. So yeah, I am Stefano Combossini. Thank you, Alberto, again for the introduction. Thank you, Nube, for your presentation. I will now present the Global Wind Power Energy Indicator. And we'll start with the outline. We'll go firstly through the input data, then I'll give you an overview of the computational pipeline. Then, of course, after the computational pipeline, I will describe what the output data of this indicator are. And then in the end, some results and a future outlook for this modeling pipeline. I'll start with the input data. The main input data that we use are the tabular wind farms data from the windpower.net. These data are in tabular format and contain many informations on the various wind farms and locations and informations about turbines and power curves. This, for instance, is the information regarding the power plant locations. These are two, as I said, given in tabular format, and they have multiple information regarding the location of the plant and various characteristics, such as the total power of the plant and what turbines constitute the plant, the number of turbines, and most importantly, the locations. Some precise, some not, and also whether these plants are onshore plants or offshore plants. Then we also have data, again, from the windpower.net, which contains information about the turbine specifications, such as rated power, rotor diameter, and many other information about the turbines. And we also have data regarding the power curves. This data is a bit more easy to interpret, as it only has turbine names or turbine identification numbers, and the instantaneous power output at a given wind speed pin, in this case with 0.5 meters per second resolution on the x-axis. And these power curves basically give us the instantaneous output of the power output of the turbine when the wind is blowing at a specific speed. Now over to the computational pipeline. We take wind farms and turbines data in the format that I described to you a few moments ago. We compute some statistics on this. That is, we compute the most frequent installations of the various turbines. So what technologies are installed more frequently. And then we filter these technologies based on how recent they are, whether they are onshore or offshore, whether the power curves are available, and we also do some other data cleaning. So in the end, we have a set of turbines technologies that will represent our the technologies that then we use for the computation of the final energy indicator. The most frequent turbines that match our requirements are leave us with 5 onshore technologies and 1 offshore technology, all with some different power outputs. And you can see them listed here in this table. What do we do then with these turbines technologies? Well, with turbines technologies and locations, we match each location to let's call it representative turbine technology. The parameter of the specific wind farm that we use to match it with a defined turbine technology is the rated power. So we use the rated power. Let's say wind farm has a rated power of for the turbine that I'll install there of 5 megawatts. We picked the turbine in between the turbines that I showed you before. That's more close to this. That's closest to the installed technology. Then, by combining these data, we obtain a merge of this information, and we get basically locations and power curves that we're going to use at those locations. So as I mentioned before, whilst we do the data cleaning, and the central part is to have data power curves available so that we can compute the power output, or actually for our case, the capacity factors. So I failed to mention that, of course, we cannot compute energy indicators without having the underlying climate variable that drives the entire process, which is wind speed. So what we actually need at the very start is gridded wind speed, and that is provided in NetCDF format as a grid, a different spatial resolution depending on the stream. So historical and projections have different spatial resolutions compared to seasonal forecasts. And I picked the height of 100 meters. And of course, this wind speed data was obtained from wind speed at 10 meters bias adjusted. I will refer you to the previous webinar to have more information in this regard. But after we have our gridded wind speed data and our locations with power curves that I described to you before how we obtain this, we just put our wind data through the locations and power curves pipeline. And as we know, for a specific wind speed, we get a specific power output, or actually a capacity factor, and we obtain locations and capacity factors. So we obtain a time series. We say, let's say at location A, we have a time series of wind speed. We put this time series of wind speed through the power curves, and we obtain a time series of capacity factors. Now, what do we do with these locations capacity factors? We can provide gridded capacity factor data at global scale, although this is used mainly for internal purposes, and it keeps the same time resolution as the input data. So if the input data is hourly, the output the output, the capacity factor time series is hourly. If the input data is 3 hourly or 6 hourly, the output data will also be 3 hourly or 6 hourly, or if it's daily, again, the output data will be daily. Then we aggregate this data using information that's embedded in the tables from the windpower.net that tell us for each location to which country the various power plants belong to. So admin zero aggregation is quite straightforward, and it's just a simple average between all the time series that are within the admin zero region. And similarly, for the admin one region, we compute an aggregation, and in this case we use a specific location. So the coordinates, latitude and longitude, we exclude all the admin one sub-country regions that don't belong to the same admin zero region. So let's say we have a location that we know is in Italy because that's the information that's provided by the windpower.net, and we know the location. We don't know a priori to which admin one region it belongs, so we just use the boundaries of the admin one regions from some shape files, and we just pick the closest admin one region to which the closest admin one region to the location of the power plant. This, of course, works for both offshore and onshore, because if it's onshore, then the power plant location will fall exactly inside the admin one region. And if it's offshore, well, we just assume that the closest one is also the one to which we attribute the power output. This is, of course, again, the plot you've seen before of the locations of the power plants, and the output of this is more specifically the climatology of this energy indicator. And you can you can see the coverage that we have using these locations, and the methodology of the aggregation at admin zero level I described to you a few seconds ago. So it should be clear how this is computed. Now for the time averaging, that's quite simple. It's just standard time averaging if we compute the climatology, and also for the final products, especially for historical current projections, the data is first delivered as monthly means, although the underlying calculations are done at a higher temporal resolution. So then going on to see some results from the projection streams, we have some seasonal climatologies for winter, spring, summer, and autumn. And the time range is 2021 to 2050. And we're picking the Italian onshore admin zero region, so actually just Italy. And we have results for different models and scenarios. And this is a mistake. It shouldn't be megawatts peak, just megawatts. Sorry for that. So we have for each climatology, we have the wind speed and the capacity factor that's corresponding to it, and we can actually plot them quite well along with the monthly values for some some specific model and scenario combination for Italy. And we can intuitively see that also at other resolutions, we're kind of like seeing the hint of the original power curve So, and everything, yeah, falls approximately along the same curve. Now going on to some results from seasonal forecasts. Seasonal forecasts have monthly runs and have different lead times. So like, for instance, the January run will, of course, not only have a month of January, but also the following months inside the same run. So the two parameters we are looking at now more specifically is the start month, so January, and lead time. So this is January for the January run, and this is the 5th, so June for the January run. So these belong to the same run, and we are plotting now the distribution of the hindcasts. And of course, as you know, hindcasts are comprised of many members, and these are bias adjusted with respect to the ERA 5 reanalysis. And we can see for different years a distribution of the hindcasts and how they relate to the reanalysis to which they were bias adjusted. Now, of course, I will add the note that we're not bias adjusting the direct output of the wind power indicator, but we are bias adjusting wind speed at 10 meters, and then we are computing at 100 meters, and then computed the energy indicator. So we can see how for higher lead times the distribution tends to shift a bit. But yeah, but overall there are not huge jumps. Now, for this is for a different start month, which is July, same lead times, 0 and 5, and we can approximately see the same behavior. Then another result. Now this time for offshore. And I showed the two slides I showed you before were for onshore wind power. And these are for offshore, and again, similar behavior. And we see especially that at the start month, the distributions are quite matching. And this one is for the start month of July, and lead time 0 and lead time 5. Now, this approach has some drawbacks. One of which is that by using the locations provided by the windpower.net, we are not covering the all the states and all the sub-regions. You saw the image I showed you before that showed some lacks in coverage at the country level, and this is even more pronounced for offshore because there are less installations. Now, so this is a drawback, and our future outlook for the development of this indicator is to use a different approach in the selection of the locations. And a way to do that is just to compute the capacity factor time series at each and every grid point, and then aggregate them at country level with the methodology that was described at the previous webinars by using the tools, the aggregation tools. And I again invite you to watch that webinar to have further information in this regard. And yeah, and we might just by employing a tool that we already have, use also exclusion errors to exclude from the aggregation those points where wind power installation is not going to happen due to various constraints such as protected areas or specific conditions of the terrain where these are these are installed. Now, also there's another point, which is that we're using, you saw the process by which we selected various technologies. We might as well run this modeling pipeline using different technologies, and then allow the users to have more choice of technologies, and also have a higher representativeness of the technology of the available technologies. So yeah, this was the overview of the wind power energy indicator, and thank you for your attention. I hope everything is clear, and don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat, and I'll do my best, and my colleagues too, to answer your doubts on this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stefano. That was very comprehensive. Of course, there's a lot more detail that we cannot fit in a short presentation. So please ask questions of clarifications. In the meantime, I will then move to the second last main presentation on global solar photovoltaic energy indicator. And this will be given by Dr. Rodrigo Amaro e Silva. And Rodrigo is a researcher at the University of Lisbon and Armin at the same time in two different places, one in Lisbon and one in south of France. And he's part of a team in charge of producing the solar PV data in the C3S Energy Service. He has a PhD in geophysical sciences and geoinformation and experience in photovoltaics, solar forecasting, and power system modeling. Since starting his participation in the C3S Energy Service, Rodrigo has dedicated his research to the regional modeling of photovoltaics. So thank you very much, Rodrigo. And the floor is yours, if I can manage to unshare. Oh, maybe I've done it already. No, stop share.
Yeah.
Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto, for the kind introduction. Let me just then start the screen sharing. Will you confirm if you can see the screen?
Yep, all good.
Yeah, thank
Please.
you. So hi, everyone. So it's my turn now to talk about the global solar photovoltaic energy indicator in the C3S Energy contract. So for today's session, at least for this specific photovoltaics part, I was wondering what could be like four goals for this. And so I would like to start by giving the context on the indicator and the environmental factors that impact this indicator, present briefly the modeling workflow, and then share with you all the undergoing improvements that we're already working on, and some expectations for the longer term future. And so the indicator that we're providing for all energy generation technologies, or at least for wind and PV, it's a capacity factor, which is an expected mean power per unit of installed capacity for a given period. So in the case of PV, it would be something like watt per watt peak or kilowatt per kilowatt peak and so on. And what's interesting is that not only this indicator by itself already provides some interesting information, it can adapt to a given scenario from a given end user by just multiplying by an installed capacity. And as already introduced by Alberto and Nube before, we address or we target three different streams at the same time. So the historical from 1950 to present, seasonal forecast 6 months ahead, but also climate projections covering 2015 to 2100. And so this indicator is, among other things, but mainly impacted by weather. And so if it's cloudy or sunny, we have less or more PV generation. The angle of incidence between the sun and the PV panels, but also the land use, because it constrains the deployment of this technology. And in the current version of the PV indicator, we are now providing, or we will provide monthly data, which was estimated using the Climix model, which is a simple model mostly known in the climate research community, where we have a simple modeling chain where we have weather data coming from either ERA5 or a seasonal forecast or climate projection onto this model, which then is converted to as an output a PV capacity factor. And we chose this simple model as a first approach because, as you'll see later, we are handling a very considerable amount of data. And so we thought this would be the most suitable choice for this step of the service. And just to give a high-level outlook on how this modeling workflow operates. And so basically we start with some gridded input data on weather, which then is ingested by the PV model and produces an also gridded PV indicator. However, the data that we provide through the service, as Stefano had already mentioned before, it's an aggregated version of this pixelized data, either at admin 0 or admin 1 spatial level. And this can depend on the data stream that we are talking about. It's also important to highlight that when we aggregate this pixelized data into this aggregated version, we consider what we call some exclusion layers in the process, where basically we filter out some regions based on predefined parameters, so that these are not considered when compounding the regional average. And these could be protected areas, like for wildlife, water bodies, high slope and high elevation territories. And just to give a very brief look at the kind of data that we produce, using the data that will be made available through the C3S Energy service, we could compute we can look at spatial patterns and map the long-term mean capacity factors for solar photovoltaics. And we see here the classical more potential on the south rather than compared in the north. We can also look at patterns in time. And so, for example, in this plot here on gray, we see all the lines for all the countries covered by the C3S service. So it's a global perspective. And I wanted to highlight arbitrarily France in blue. And so each value that we see is the annual mean of the photovoltaic capacity factor, so year by year. And we see that when we look at all the countries at the same time, we see lots of, it almost seems like noise, some higher, some lower. But it's interesting that, for example, if we focus on France specifically, but this could be done for other countries, we could identify, for example, 2 periods from 1950 to 1980, where there seems to be a slow trend with the PV capacity factor decreasing slowly over time, which then rebounds and grows back a little after 1980. And this has been already reported by the climate research community as the solar brightening and dimming phenomenon, which basically relates to the air pollution resulting from the Industrial Revolution, which was then recovered a bit later. And in terms of improvements, so the first thing that's important to highlight is that, as I said before, the first version of this data will be monthly, but we're already working on improving it to hourly data. And this will be done by using a similar modeling workflow, but using instead a more detailed physics-based approach that we developed ourselves. And it considers in more detail factors such as the PV module orientation, so how tilted and where the PV module is looking at, but also loss factors such as thermal losses, optical losses, and also module and inverter efficiency. It's a bit repetitive, but just it's important also to be clear and state that the same exclusion areas will be considered at this stage. Just to give a glimpse on a technological factor, because most in the beginning I was talking about weather and the sun position. This module orientation factor or parameter, it's something which is very important to take into account because depending on how a PV module is placed, it can impact both its yield but also its seasonality. And so, for example, if we have something more horizontal, it should produce more in summer and less in winter. But if we make something more tilted, for example, towards the south, we should still have this same difference between winter and summer, but with much less magnitude. And so at this stage, we will consider location-specific distributions of PV module tilt and orientation. And so it means that depending on where we are looking at, we will consider a different configuration. And this was based on real PV metadata that we collected from German and French PV installations, which we then worked to extrapolate to the whole globe. And so what this new iteration of the PV model will result will be on a better representation of the annual cycle. And so, for example, if we see the first plot on top, we see on orange this new hourly model, and in blue the old model that was used to compute monthly data only. And we see that this more accurate modeling actually gives more PV output in wintertime. Which just means that the first version is a bit more conservative on the winter-related losses. But just from moving to monthly to hourly data, we will finally be able to grasp on the daily cycle of PV generation, but also have a better understanding of the shorter-term weather, because basically we see hour by hour the variation of this profile. It's also important to highlight some computational aspects because it's not all about science. So I hope that from what I was able to share, that you have a vision of the number of calculations which are implied and that result in a big demand in computational time and computational memory, because this second step or second stage of the service will have a much larger spatial and temporal coverage. Because we'll go back to 1950, we will include the seasonal forecast and the climate projection, and we will expand the spatial side to the whole globe. And when we add the module orientation to the bill, let's say, so suddenly I start calculating for a PV looking south, a PV looking southwest, for example, this just increases the number of calculations needed. And so this raised the great need for optimizing our algorithm. And it's important to stress that thanks to the help of ICS, so together with ICS, we were able to reduce our computational time by at least 75%. And we are still having ongoing actions to further improve this, because in fact, the more efficient our calculations, the more freedom we have to think about modeling approaches without being constrained by, does it take too long or does it take too much memory to run? Another aspect that will come also a bit later, it pertains to the targeting of PV typologies. And so basically, although I always say photovoltaics, as if it was one single thing, in fact, as a technology, it can be implemented in various contexts, such as residential rooftops, industrial rooftops, or also ground-based large-scale installations. And if you look only, for example, even the last case of the ground-based installation, just this single denomination, for example, it can pertain to installations that are fixed, so they don't move. or installations that have tracking devices that help the PV systems to keep up with the movement of the sun. And so this is among other things, a matter of seasonality, because depending on how the PV panel is placed relative to the sun position, we can have a different profile of our PV output. And so, for example, I just produced this illustrative, very light example of what could be a case of a ground-based installation, which is fixed, and an industrial installation, which is also fixed, but usually is much more horizontal because it keeps up with the rooftop geometry. And we see that there's a clear difference between the summer-winter shape of the profiles. If we take into account urban rooftops, it becomes even worse because, or at least even more complex. I took here a photo of the historical part of Lisbon, the city where I made most of my studies. And we can clearly see from the image that there's a varied mix of geometries with the rooftops. And so this is something that should also be taken into account. And the importance of this is that usually when we have a single PV model at play, it's a kind of framework where a one model fits all. And in fact, from moving from this kind of framework to a more per typology modeling, we are able to avoid overly generic model parameters. And just as a hopefully funny kind of illustration, it would be similar from moving to having giraffe mean height and like monkey mean height instead of just the animal mean height, which actually would not represent any of the species individually. And so the goal is, just to finalize on this, to differentiate PV into different segments or typologies, where each typology assumes a specific model assumption. For example, on the tilt azimuth, on the PV performance. We could also take into account different spatial placements in terms of land use. So, for example, rooftops could be considered mostly in urban areas and ground-based installations on non-urban areas. And for large-scale PV, it would allow to differentiate fixed from single-axis tracking systems, as an example. And so in the end, we would have a completely new PV model framework that needed to be redesigned, where in fact we have, let's call it, several PV substreams in play that each calculate and compute their own time series, which is then aggregated, for example, to compute an overall total regional PV. And I put there the Jupyter logo because we intend to make a Jupyter notebook example so that people could have a feeling on how these will operate in practice. And we firmly believe that this change in the modeling perspective allows for a more accuracy, but also modeling flexibility. Because, for example, if you look at the climate projections, it would allow end users to, for example, assume not only different climate scenarios, for example, but also different technological scenarios. What would happen if I had 100% rooftops or 50% rooftop, 50% ground-based? And so people suddenly are allowed to play with these distributions, just as simulating different technological scenarios. To conclude, so in terms of added value, we believe that this new step of the C3S Energy service will give even better data for people to look at regional PV time series in terms of assessing the impact of climate change, which is robust and interpretable. And at least for this initial stage of the second phase, we see it as an iterative product, which has embodied a continuous improvement mindset, such as the moving from monthly to hourly time resolution. We take this opportunity also to contribute to science through method and review papers, which we are now working on. And fortunately for us, it benefits from interactions with both ENTSO-E and Task 16 from IEA PVPS group. in terms of what's to come, and so I separated more on shorter term expectations to longer, not yet 100% sure ones. And so, as if I understood correctly from the Q&A section, the monthly data will be made available by the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken. And we are already working towards having hourly more accurate data. And so a bit later, we hope to provide data which is specific for different typologies, such as residential, industrial, and utility scale, while allowing end users to make similar calculations for their own PV installations. And so, for example, this is just a rough idea, but to have some kind of functions embodied in the C3S kind of coding toolkit, which would allow people that download their own, for example, ERA5 data to implement the same model that we do, but with different parameters that maybe better correspond, better match to their own installation. Because when we do regional data, we are looking more at a set of installations installed in a given area, but likely there are people who are not so interested. Actually, as we saw on the form, they are interested in just looking at one specific installation. And so this is something to be done as a calculation by the user, but using the toolkit that we provide ourselves. On the longer term, and just to be fully honest, not 100% sure, at least the first point is quite likely. We are looking at considering later additional typologies, because PV is a quite dynamic element, which every month seems to be popping up in a different setting. And so now we're having also floating PV, PV balconies, and bifacial PV. And consider the refining of the exclusion zones by having maybe per typology kind of exclusion zones. So, for example, floating PV could only be, I mean, of course, considered in water bodies, PV balconies in urban areas, and so on. There are also other non-weather factors that are not accounted for, and we hope and we'll make an effort to look at how could this be integrated in the C3S service, such as storage, curtailment, module aging, but also soiling. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Very good. Thank you, Rodrigo. That was a very nice overview. And in the meantime, we received a lot of questions. We actually are back on time now. So thank you, Stefano and Rodrigo, for eating a bit of time on previous delay. And now we have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. So there is, like I said, several questions here. We'll try to address all of them. Some of them have been addressed already and answered in the Q&A chat. So please have a read at the answers. If you feel that these have not addressed your concern, please come back with the follow-up questions. And also thanks to another ICS member, Stefano Cordedu, has answered a few of them. Again, if you like additional clarifications, please have a look. So I will start with some of the unanswered questions, and then maybe if there is time, we can go back to some answered which might need a bit more expansion. First question that it hasn't been addressed yet. So this is, we'll give it to Stefano Campostrini on wind. So regarding wind energy, is there any specific turbine data available in India region?
Thank you for your question. The answer is we are providing aggregated data for admin zero and for part of the Indian admin 1 regions, but specific wind turbine data. So if I'm understanding correctly, the the question is on whether we are producing like power plant specific data. No, we are not doing that. Indeed, the windpower.net data is proprietary, so you can do that yourself if you buy the data, but otherwise we are bound to producing them at aggregated level.
Yeah, thanks, Stefano. So yeah, we have the permission from the owner of the data to use it and provide it as an aggregated value, but not, as Stefano said, provide it as original data, of course. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of the data. But yeah, there are data, and yeah, I guess it's also increasing the amount of data. So that's a moving target as well. So the windpower.net actually provides regularly updates. If you are on that circuit, you can get updates. I mean, you have to purchase it, but yeah, without adding more publicity to windpower.net, we move to the next question. Let's go to Rodrigo. Are you planning to release any products related to the photovoltaic energy indicator at the city scale?
So in terms of, so it's, first of all, it's interesting to see that there are people that are looking at that kind of spatial scale. That was one of the questions we had in the service, and that's why it's so important to have this kind of events. In terms of workflow, it would be rather simple. It's just that on the aggregation step of our workflow, just to include also a city level kind of scale, spatial scale. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alberto, it's not in our horizon to include such a fine spatial detail.
Yeah, so I guess it's related to also the individual installations for wind power mentioned before. Maybe it's also important to understand the fact that the service, C3S Energy service, is looking at the global scale for the 3 streams, and already having moved from European to global. I mean, this is something that we are doing at the moment, has required an enormous amount of computational time and disk space. So there is a limit to the spatial scale we can reach. We are favoring in the future releases, we are favoring this temporal scale. So going to hourly at the moment is more of a priority than going to fine spatial scales, because obviously also the spatial scale scales as a square rather than linearly. And so that would require much more space and computation. So in terms of representation, like I said, we take into account the individual location to some extent, but then we provide the aggregation, and the individual scale is accounted for at the scale that we are using at the moment, which is a 1/4 degree grid, the same as ERA5. So that's the most we are able to do at the moment. So a 1/4 degree actually is for the historical and projections, but for the seasonal forecast for completeness is at 1 degree, because seasonal forecast also has many ensemble members, and yeah, it requires a lot of data as well, a lot of space. Okay, so if you like other explanations, so that 100-meter wind, maybe, yes, Stefano Cordedo already replied, but I don't know if you want to add anything, Stefano. So there is
Yes, indeed.
a power law transformation from 10-meter wind speed to 100-meter height. Why aren't you using 100-meter wind speed data directly from ERA5?
Yeah, indeed. Stefano replied already, but for the sake of completeness, I'm going to repeat his answer, which is that we're providing 3 streams, historical, projection, and seasonal, but only for one of these, we have a wind speed at 100 meter. That's for the historical stream. So for consistency, we are producing the 100-meter wind speed that we need, for instance, for the wind power energy indicator. We produce that through the same methodology so that they are in some way comparable to each other. We, as Stefano, as my colleague mentioned, we also checked that after using the power law transformation, that wind speed at 100 meters for the historical stream are not too different from the original Era 5 data at 100 meters from which they were actually computed. So yeah, that's the answer, which is for consistency.
Okay, thanks. But we should also say that I think this was presented, as Stefano said, at the previous webinar, the first one, the recording is available. We specialize the coefficient for different locations and time of day as well, and months of the year. So it's not a simple coefficient like the standard way to use it is a constant 1/7. In this case, we change it from hour to hour, date, month to month, and by location.
Yeah, indeed, it's a gridded file for the alpha coefficient. So it's a multi-dimensional alpha coefficient.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So another one for both. Are you planning to release Jupyter notebooks to use this data? So I don't know, Rodrigo first, or Stefan, don't fight over that.
Okay, so I can go first. So the answer is yes, although what exact notebooks are to be developed are yet under discussion. But I could easily imagine examples such as the function of the toolkit that I mentioned on how to calculate your own PV data based on the CDS input data. So people download their own data, their own weather data, and they compute the PV using our functions. And so that could easily be made into a notebook. Another example, for example, could be once we have these different PV typologies, just a demonstration on how you can go from isolated typologies to a possible set, a possible aggregation where people just choose a given mix. And so at least these two could easily be done. In case there's a specific notebook that a given end user would be interested in having, I mean, that's gold kind of feedback for us. And so feel free to share with us your needs.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I just like to amplify also the comment. If you have suggestions for Jupyter notebooks, please write it here in the Q&A, or I think it's the Q&A, maybe the chat as well. Okay, Stefano.
Yes, indeed. There's not much more to add, in the sense that, of course, I cannot, for wind power, you cannot fulfill the same requests as SPV, because, of course, they are two different indicators. But yeah, the idea is the same as for SPV, which is, yeah, we're going to provide Jupyter notebooks, and you have suggestion, please provide them to us.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Yeah, so like specific for wind, for example, what we are thinking is that because there are so many combinations of wind turbines and locations and so on, we will provide some basic data using the most common turbines, but then the Jupyter notebook would allow to compute other combinations, also taking more than one turbine at the same location. I mean, the same grid cell, not the same spatial location. So you can have a mix of wind turbines within a grid cell, which something that we aren't able to do because of space limitation and computational space. So we provide some initial data, mainly as an example to use, and then with the Jupyter Notebook you can drill down, but obviously for specific locations, because computations is intensive. Okay, so now switching to another topic here, we have a question about projections used RCP. So previous projections, in the current service phase 1, we used RCPs, and the projections were actually based on Eurocordex, because it was a European domain. Eurocordex was available. For the global scale, it was more difficult to put together various Cordex data, so regional data. From projections, also because we wanted to move to CMIP6, which we've done, and the regional downscaled runs are not available yet for CMIP6. They're starting to become available. So yeah, we use SSP, the social economic pathways, and what we use are four socioeconomic pathways. So it's 1, 2, 6, 2, 4, 5, 3, 7, 0, and 5, 8, 5. So we leave out of these are 4 of the main ones, and we don't consider 119, I guess, because this is the lowest emission scenario. We're already over that as it is, so that's why we're not including it here. Okay, we're getting close to the end. A couple of more questions. One, I see, Rodrigo, you answered that, but I'm actually curious about your verbal answer about, there was about solar PV panels installed in the area of dams, huge water basins, and so on. Is it feasible? And I guess it is to some extent. But the other one about agri PV, my understanding is that isn't that the same as large scale PV, just at the higher elevation? So in practice, it shouldn't change too much, or can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So there may be some like second order factors, like does the vegetation below the PV panels make it cooler or warmer? I will skip that. It's more interesting actually to mention that as a new way of implementing PV, there are now surfacing quite diverse applications, because people are just testing as many different things as they can to balance or to look at the land use, the impact on the agriculture, the impact on the PV generation. And so I think it's a bit early to define what it is, but I can just share with you all that I've seen vertical PV installations where they are like walls, just like separating different crops. You can have PV panels on top of the crops, maybe with, maybe without tracking, maybe monofacial, maybe bifacial. And so there seems to be a lot of potential, and only time will tell us if all these different versions are all feasible, and they depend just on the context, or maybe as anything new on tech, some will try, some will be identified as not suitable or not ideal, and so maybe some will stay, maybe some will be forgotten, but it's early.
Okay, thank you, Rodrigo. And last question to Stefano. So, as ERA 5 has known biases in representing wind speed along the coasts, and not only, I should say, would you be considering other reanalysis data sets to compute wind energy indicators?
Thank you for the question. And the answer is using other data sets, actually no, but using some data sets like Global Wind Atlas for adjusting wind speed. That's something we're currently studying, and so we don't have a definitive answer yet, but that's work in progress. I don't know, Alberto, if you want to add something to it.
Yeah, thank you, Stefano. Yeah, so just to complement that, we actually have spent quite a bit of time looking at the alternative solutions. And unless we've missed something, there's no really better data set that is global and provides time series. The Global Wind Atlas that Stefano mentioned is normally given as, at least in the free access form, is given as a mean data set. So the mean values with, there's some basic statistics, but not the time series that we would need to do a proper bias adjustment. I mean, we can still use it, but we can only adjust the mean or thereabout. And so, and then actually there are, with the latest Global Wind Atlas, we spotted some issues. So we are still debating which version of the Global Wind Atlas to use. And I know they're working on the fourth generation. So we might wait for the fourth one to arrive. We looked at other reanalysis, of course. There are references where you can see how the reanalysis compare. But yeah, reanalysis are the only data sets, like MERA, for example, is the other global one, and there's another JRA from Japanese data set. But ERA 5 overall, despite the drawbacks that everybody knows, is still considered the best global data set. That's why we're using. And like I said, it's very, very hard to find something that is able to adjust it at the global scale. And so, yeah, we're aware of the limitations, but at the moment, there's not much better that we can use, I'm afraid. But like I said, if you have suggestions, please provide them here. We'd be very happy to consider them. Okay, so I think that will take us to the close. We are, yeah, 3 minutes away of our hour and a half webinar. I just want to say that this is part of the webinar series, like I said at the beginning, and the webinar series is composed of 5 webinars. It was 4, and we split this energy indicators into 2 because we have a lot to say. Like as you saw, we covered wind and solar only today. Next week, same day, same time, we're going to cover hydropower and electricity demand, and actually even more than electricity is energy demand. And then we'll have webinar 4 about the 2 case studies that are also included in the project. So this later in the year will be announced. And then next year, webinar 5 on global climate and energy products and updated data sets on the that are actually available. So please stay tuned. And before we leave, I'd like to thank again all the speakers, the people who attended. We had a very good attendance and questions, particularly a lot of interesting questions. Thank you very much for asking all those questions. And again, the organizers of the webinar, particularly Elena Restivo at Inside Climate Service. And this is also the registration is already out on LinkedIn and the Twitter and our webpage. So please register if you haven't done it already, and we'll hope to see you next week. Thank you very much for today, and until next week, goodbye.